Hey there, human beings. I hope there's people coming for this first GattoCast episode. So it's the first live episode of my uh, wannabe podcast. Um, I announced it last year. Then I published a few episodes that were available for patrons only. And so I decided to go live because I think it's just easier and I don't have to waste too much time mounting. And it's also nice to have some interaction. So, thanks for joining me in this discussion. I'm sorry you might be used to some kind of not so serious topics that I usually deal with nanoware of steel. You might not be interested in a topic as well, like everyone is talking about COVID nowadays. But I really think it's a very important topic, of course, because it's affecting everyone's lives. But I also think that I sort of have the not really the duty, but have the need to share some ideas I have on the topic that might not align with what we hear usually on the media. And so I think it's something I really wanted to talk, and I hope there would be interaction with the public during this first live episode. So if you have questions or objections or any kind of any kinds of thing you want to ask me, I'll be open for discussion. So again, why this topic? I'm a musician. I'm not just a musician, as many of you may know. So I'm also an astrophysicist. So I have a quantitative training. I have a quantitative background, so to say. And I really think that in the last months, so the way the data has been presented to the public was like the data that supports some kind of policies in light of the epidemics, that is of the pandemics that is affecting the world right now. There have been, to say the least, like a very inappropriate handling of the data. Let's put it that way. And as a musicians, I was saying then we have been affected the most. So we have been really paying a high price for this, like with show closures and festivals being cancelled, and entire careers tours being cancelled and thrown to the trash bin. So it's not really an exciting time. I also feel, I mean, at the beginning, of course, we were sort of we had the feeling that we were in this together. It's something completely unexpected. It's completely dangerous. We didn't know what to do, and so we sort of followed the guidelines. We trusted everything that was being told us. And I mean, we'll talk about this, but I seriously didn't doubt about the way the problem was presented. And now we are still here. We started this, the whole thing started. Let's close everything for 2 weeks. Then it became 1 month, then 2 months. Then we reopened. Then we are back at square one. So after October, we are back to the where we were, more or less. I mean, with differences, of course. But so we are back to where we were at the in March, basically. So one thing that strikes me the most is that usually the way that this problem is being handled at large, it involves a lot of logical fallacies, in the sense that there are different issues at stake here. So one issue is the mortality of the virus. So I'm not an expert on biology. I don't know much about this. I will refrain from talking about this at this stage, but it's something that it's important to know. But maybe, I mean, I'm planning to do some discussions on this with actual experts, so with actual medical doctors and people that work in the field of medicine and biology. The other issue is how it spreads. So one, we know, is this dangerous or not, is one question. How does this spread? It's another question. So it can be very dangerous and spread very easily, or the other way around. I mean, the two things are not related. The other issue is how you deal with this. So we have sort of I mean, I include myself in this because it's also my first reaction. So we are associating lockdowns and and these kind of restrictions with the mortality, like the dangerousness of this virus. So, in the sense that we say we need to lock down because the virus is dangerous sometimes, or we need to lock down because it's phrases I hear. I mean, not everyone says that, but sort of when you say that you don't really believe lockdowns are an effective measure in containing it, then that's the thing that people tell you most of the times is, well, but the virus is dangerous, right? So people are dying. But it's not the same problem, right? So that's two different issues. Whether lockdown is a proper measure in counteracting this pandemic is one issue, and how this pandemic spreads is another, and how dangerous is that, it's yet another question. So these things need to be kept in mind, because most of the times when I discuss about these issues, then it's they're being conflated together. There's no clear distinction between the different levels at which this logic works. Okay, so another issue then is the cost of dealing with it, right? So we might grant that lockdowns are an effective measure, but then they have a price. I mean, let's just stop pretending that, like sometimes we do, we just need to shut everything down for 1 week or 2 weeks, 1 month. I mean, for that, it means that many people for 1 month, maybe they won't have an income. So it's not like, let's just shut down things for 1 month more and it would be fine. So there are costs associated to that. Maybe it's worth, it's a cost, it's a risk that's worth taking. Maybe it's not. It's something that needs to be judged independently. However, it's that has nothing to do with the. I mean, it has to do, but it's a different set of problem. Of course, once you establish that you have some set of measures that are effective, and you have a certain level of mortality, then you need to establish a trade-off between the cost of these measures and the cost in mortality of the virus. And let's not pretend that it's not just about shutting down the economy. We know there's an actual health cost in mental health and physical health associated to lockdown. So, but again, this is a different issue. And these issues, you can sort of address them scientifically. You can look at data. You can try to make some kind of rational analysis of all these things. So it's a sort of a scientific question, right? The last question is political. So we want to, that's a different thing. I mean, we need to establish as a society whether do we want to pay this cost? Like, what's the implications for our freedom? And this is a discussion that everyone needs to have. It cannot just be restricted to a group of experts. I mean, it's the whole society is paying the price for these things, and the whole society deserves to be involved in these kind of decisions. I think it's and this is a different issue. So of course, then you can say, well, we are facing an emergency. Let's suspend all, like constitutions or let's just shut down everything, and then put everyone in sort of a cage for a while. But then, and this is sort of acceptable, I would say, for for a short period of time. But what if, like now, this thing is, first of all, is going to be delayed all the time? Like, we don't know when it's going to end. From a political point of view, I'm saying. And every time there's like some kind of new reason to delay these shutdowns and these sort of restrictions of personal liberty further. And this cannot be just addressed by means of science or like rational reasoning. I mean, you can make a rational case for or against it by any means, but this is already a political question. And again, this is another kind of discussion. It's separated from everything else. So even if we decide that we can shut down everything for a reasonable cost in terms of lives saved and lives lost in the process of shutting down things, there's still the problem of, okay, do we as a society agree to this? Should we? I mean, should we? For me, it's a different question. So, and all of these things get mixed together. So we should be really careful when doing these kind of points. So yeah, as I was saying, like, you have usually some these kinds of logical fallacies when you say that you don't really agree with lockdowns, then it means that you're not counting the human cost of lives lost because of COVID. Or otherwise it means that you are against lockdown just because you're doing a cost benefit analysis. But no, I mean, what I want to talk about here is just the evidence that we have when you look at the data at large, not just one country and some kind of evidence like, oh, we shut down, then the cases went down. Yeah, it's more complicated than that. So it's not even related to a cost benefit analysis, I was saying. And then, of course, like not being in agreement with some kind of measures that have been put in place by a government doesn't mean that you actually automatically believe in conspirations, or I'm sort of some kind of weirdo and I believe in reptilians or some kind of conspiracy behind this whole thing. I think it's just a human mistake on a very large scale, but I think you can rationally explain why this thing is happening. Even though, again, if for me, like you cannot really push further with lockdowns on rational grounds, but I can understand why this is happening. So that's my point. So first thing is that's really striking me and is touching me a lot as a scientist. So I'm talking as an astrophysicist. So I'm used to data analysis. I'm used to model testing. So what you do in science, you have, you've got a theory of how the world works. In my case, it's, I don't know, galaxies, the universe at large, stars. You have this theory, you have data that you get from the, observations, can be radio telescopes, whatever, and you do a test. So you say, okay, is my theory able to explain this data? Right? This is how science works. Now, if I find some data that is not in agreement with my theory, there's two ways. I mean, maybe I have a problem with the data. It can be. Maybe I have a problem with the theory. So it doesn't automatically mean that the theory is wrong. But if you have one piece of evidence on one hand that it's in conflict with your theory, you have another piece. You merge all the pieces together, and it might mean that actually your theory is wrong, right? And so the important thing to keep in mind about science is that once you establish that the data is reliable and they don't agree with the theory, then you should consider to drop the theory, maybe modify it, or change it, extend it. And the reason why is that I'm saying this is that most of the times that when we look when like evidence for the efficacy of the lockdowns is being presented, you see that there are like some plots, some graphs that actually are in agreement. But the point is not about those that are in agreement. It's about those that are in disagreement with your theory. That's the whole point of science, right? It's like the falsifiability principle of Popper. So you can find as many cases as you want that are in agreement with your theory. But once you find something like solid observations that do not fit with your observation, with your theory, then you should really think about changing something at least about your theory. Maybe not dropping it altogether, but acknowledging that there is some piece missing. Okay, and so the last thing that is really important here, and it's a logical fallacy that I see all the time being applied when you look into the scientific literature. So I call it like with quotation mark because it's not really scientific in my opinion. There's a lot of mixture between using as an evidence of a theory the fact that correlation. So some facts are correlated, but we know that correlation does not imply causation. So this is one of the most important tenets of science. Okay, correlation does not imply causation. So let me, just to prove my point, is let me share the screen with you. I hope you can see this. But these are like weird things that might correlate. Okay, so this is a website that collects spurious correlations. So you see here suicides by hanging versus US spending on science. So these two variables seem to be correlated. Does it mean that one is causing the other? Of course not. I mean, this is it's bullshit. You can see this number of people who drowned by falling into a pool is correlated with films Nicolas Cage appeared in. Again, it's another crazy kind of correlation. So would you trust like this as a basis of a theory? I don't think so. I mean, it's a I wouldn't even try to make a case for this to justify this. So again, this is very important because when you look at papers and sort of again scientific analysis on the on what's going on with the situation with the coronavirus, then it's you see all the time coming this kind of logic. So you see there is a lockdown on the time axis, and then you see the curve, and then the curve at some point goes down, and then what you see is that, oh well, then the lockdown that happened before the peak of the curve, and this is actually not even true, but anyway, let's assume that it's what happens, happened at this point, and then the curve is going down, and then it means that the lockdown caused the decrease in the cases. Now, this is a very weak point of reasoning. So you don't argue this way. You shouldn't argue this way in science. You should always remember that you need more evidence to spot a correlation. Okay, sorry. Let me just take a second to have a look at the comments. I see there's many comments here. So first of all, let me comment about the situation in Italy. I mean, the situation in Italy is not so bad as the first wave as far as closures are concerned. There are subdivisions within regions with different colors depending on a set of parameters. And so it pretty much depends on which region you are. It can be a red region, deep red region. Yellow region means there's no there is not a big threat. So not everything is open, but bars are allowed to operate up to they were allowed. They're not allowed to operate right now. I think it's not at the moment, but they will be, I think, from next week, at least until 6 p.m. And then there's a curfew starting at 10. So it's not so bad, but still there's lots of people that cannot perform their activities, and so yeah, it's not so bad. But again, let me stress that there's a whole sector of the population that is prevented from working in any way, shape, or form. So one of the things that I would like to say is that again, as a musician, now let me open this parenthesis, which is unrelated to the topic of tonight's discussion, but as a musician, I really feel the pain that many of my colleagues are going through this at this moment, because they cannot work. It's even not just the musicians, but all the sound engineers, light engineers, sound technicians, all the people that work in this industry. So it's a lot of people, and it's a lot of mess. It's a huge damage. There's places were not open anymore, and the worst thing is that you're even prevented from talking about some ways you might try to reopen or do things like safely or whatever. No, this is completely being excluded, and I find this thing really, really terrible. But that's another discussion. So let me go back to what I was talking before. So I was making, again, a few points that should be, for me, like the most it's very the most basic really the basics of the scientific methods, right? So always respect your observations. If you have like some observation that are at odds with your theory, you should really think about changing your theory, instead of like maybe just adding parameters, adding ad hoc hypothesis and stuff like that. So that's the other thing. And always remember that correlation does not imply causation. So you can see a lot of correlations. You can make a case. I mean, if you see like things correlated on a very wide variety of cases, and very you can estimate the likelihood. Anyway, I think I'm going into very kind of complicated, like mathematical topics, but in general, this does not imply. So you really need a lot of kind of different sources of evidence to prove a point. You cannot just show a plot and say, look, this happened at this point, and this other thing happened at this other point, then A caused B. No, well, sorry, doesn't work that way. All right, so let me state my point a little bit more clearly. Now, then I will elaborate on how um, on how did I get to these conclusions, and I want to make these conclusions clear and sort of try to make them understandable to as many people as possible. So the first thing that I like the first point of my conclusion is that it's not clear how much lockdowns have helped. Again, we are exposed to a series of scientists that claim that they saved millions of lives. If you actually look into the debate, if you look into the literature, I think the debate is pretty much open. It's not clear. And like, if we say it's not clear, like for the effects of, such a microscopic, huge action like lockdowns, we cannot really estimate what the impact was, the actual impact was on saving lives, then it means that, maybe we should be skeptical about imposing this kind of large scale measure that we know for sure impact life in many other ways. We know that they are preventing people from going to work, from getting a salary, from, for many, it's many people lost their homes, they lost their jobs, the people are losing what makes their lives meaningful. So besides all the other kinds of problems that might, come correlated with lockdowns, like mental problem, violence, domestic violence. Anyway, it's a different topic, but we know that lockdowns cost a lot, but we don't know how much they are effective. I will elaborate on this. I will show you why we don't know that how effective they are. The second thing is that reality is really complex. So I have the feeling that this whole debate has been focused on the lockdown, no lockdown analysis, right? So it's like this whole issue of the pandemic. We are always talking: should we restrict more or less? And then on a side note, well, maybe we should make some, places in the hospitals, or I don't know, we should do something else. It's always about this is part of the logic. It's always about something we should do more. We should do something. Maybe there are more factors at work. I mean, it's not just lockdowns, no lockdowns. There's thousands of other factors. So I don't know, quality of the air, temperature. I mean, there's whatever you can think of. Maybe it's not just, like about closing people in a cage. Maybe there are other ways of transmission. So, and this is something I want to talk about later, but this is the first issue I have with the whole approach that has been sort of discussed in the media. It's always like, should we close more? Should we close less? And then when something happens, it's because you close more or you close less. So usually it's when cases go up and you close, then it's people are not being compliant. When cases go down and you close it, so you see it's the effect of the lockdown. So you can find evidence in the curves for both cases. And the thing is that these curves, these contagions, do not really depend on this single variable. So we shouldn't focus, the debate should not focus on this one. And the other thing that is pretty interesting to me is the way that we assume that humans should comply to everything they say. So the politicians say you should stay 2 months at home without seeing anyone and wear 3 masks and do this and do that. But we know, I mean, and then we complain. Then we complain with people when they don't do that. But we know that human nature is imperfect in this sense. I mean, we cannot just comply to any order we get. So whenever we plan a set of laws and restrictions, and we have to deal with intrinsic fact that people won't change, their behavior from one day to the other at 100%. They can change quite a lot. We've seen that. But at some point, you have the need to see people. You have to need to go out. Maybe sometimes you forget the mask. Maybe you put it improperly. You don't do it on purpose. But we are not like people that we don't work with medicine, so we are not used to wear masks. We don't know how to put them properly. We don't know. There's a lot of things we do improperly with masks, and we have to factor it inside the fact that when we say, if everyone needs to wear masks, okay, we know already that when we do this, when we impose like people the mask wearing, most of the people will wear it in the wrong way, and you cannot blame them because it's we are just not used to that. It takes time, maybe. I mean, sometimes you cannot just simply wear them. You need to eat, you need to drink, you need to you're on an airplane, you need to eat and drink, and then the rest of the flight you're still wearing your mask. But then for that 10 minutes, 20 minutes, you eat, you want to breathe maybe at some point, maybe it's you might have problems breathing. So again, that's a that's also a different issue. But I have the feeling that every time that these things are being imposed on us, then they always assume that we are, we should comply perfectly, and if we do this, then people will comply and everything will be nice. And then if it's not, it's because people didn't comply. But I think it's already wrong to think that people will comply 100% in the first place. You have to agree that there will be like non-compliance. It's just human nature in this sense, and it's completely, being locked in your home for most of the people, it's something that's completely natural. It's not natural. So you have to deal with the fact that someone will not obey all these rules. It's simply impossible. Let me go back to one comment, and I think that it's pretty interesting here before I move forward with my rant. So Manila is saying that she doesn't understand why, with and without lockdowns, like everyone is wearing a mask right now, but still the number of infections is comparable with what we had at the beginning. And I think this is a very strong point in, not against masks per se, but against the way we are wearing masks, against all this social stigma that's been applied to wearing mask, not wearing a mask. What I mean is that we had, like, back in February, March, no one was wearing masks, and we had a spike in the contagion curve, right? And the infections went up, deaths went up very quickly in an exponential fashion. So now, after 4 months, like in Italy, compliance rate with masks was between 80 and 90%. In October, when we had the second wave starting, we had exactly the same dynamics. It's basically the same dynamic. You can compare the curves, like the death curves. I wouldn't compare the contagions and the the infections, in the sense that they are measured in two very different ways. So you cannot really compare them. But the shape of the curve is basically the same in Italy, and same thing in the rest of Europe. So basically, all of Europe has been masked, apart from a few exceptions. But Italy, Spain, everyone has been wearing masks, and still cases, spiked in a very short amount of time. You had this exponential growth. So again, I don't understand this either. My take on this is that the way we are wearing masks is not effective. So maybe if we all had this kind of surgeon masks, like with the surgical mask with the very extremely efficient filters, maybe, I don't know. It's always what if. I don't know. I mean, would we be able altogether to wear them correctly? I don't know. I don't think so. I mean, I don't think it's possible, like, to educate people not to, you shouldn't touch your eyes. Once you touch your mask, you shouldn't touch your nose. I mean, these things we do most of the times without even thinking. So I don't know. It's a very fair point. So if you see that, and this is, again, it's a point against, for my opinion, against most of the things that are being told in the media, the way the problem is being posed. So I don't agree with this. So there's a comment that says the most of the people wear a mask in a very wrong way, and all that chin instead of nose and mouth. I don't agree with this, in the sense that I really see, in Italy at least, but I've seen them. I think you can see them pretty much everywhere. It doesn't depend on that. I mean, there are people that wear them incorrectly at times, but you cannot blame, like, the full blown explosion of the second wave on the fact that a few people were wearing them not so perfectly, because most of the people are actually being pretty much careful at covering their nose. I mean, I am. Everyone, not everyone, of course. But then if your action relies on the fact that either 95% of the people do this correctly, or it's completely screwed up, then I think it's even worthless to try to do that. I mean, if the result of just a very small fraction of people being in compliance with the measure is exactly the same as not wearing any mask at all, then on the case number, then I don't think you can really make a rational case for a mask wearing in the way we are doing right now. If you want to, like, really invest a lot of money and time in teaching people how to wear masks, how they should change masks with really sophisticated filters every day, and all these kind of things. Maybe we can talk about this. I wouldn't agree, but it's something that you can say. Like, the way we're doing this, I think there's pretty much enough evidence that says it's not really effective. Anyway, Okay, so this is the other thing. So counter comment would be as people don't use 100% correctly masks, so we lock them down. I mean, this is something you could argue again, but I have problems with locking down people. First of all, let's even say it's mostly because of the effects that you see that when you lock down people, do not really change the curve and do not really spread the infection as much as we are led to believe. So let me comment on another comment. So this, what about the possibility that wearing masks gives a sense of full security and thus causes people to be less careful? That's absolutely true. I mean, it's part of the problem, probably. That you have a device which is not really effective, but you still feel protected, whereas you're not probably. So again, I don't want to really focus on mask. I would like to talk about a different topic tonight. It's because again, it's another issue. So my first issue is with the data. So the way you look at the data and you interpret correlations, causations, and how you extrapolate, for example, the numbers of lives saved thanks to some measures. I have problems with the way these things have been dealt with, and so I'll move on with this as soon as possible. Okay, so I have another set of reflections I wanted to share with you, which is again, it's related to what I was telling before. We cannot really reason about a one-dimensional world with just one factor. So remember that for me, like this pandemic is not just one axis. Should we shut down more or less? Like the way the pandemic spread is a function of many variables, to put it in mathematical terms, and you should really focus on a large array of variables. And this one, when you try to single out the effect of restrictions, then you find that the effects are really small. So it's not really that we shouldn't really focus the whole debate about this. There are other things that we should talk about, I think. But again, one problem that I see with this, the way this thing has been dealt with, is that we have sort of, again, it's part of human nature, so we have to deal with it, but at least try to make some reflection about the fact that we always look for scapegoats. So the people are always driven to think that something happens, then it must be somebody's fault. That's the first thing we see, right? I mean, there's a pandemic. Oh, the government didn't shut down in time. Then the government shuts down. Oh, the government shut down too much. It's always there's always some kind of attributing, in this case, to the government, to the political actions, an effect. So we see something happening. It must be someone had done it. But I think we have to accept the fact that things are not always under control. So there are lots of things that might be you cannot even think about controlling them. And one thing that I modified about the way I think about this pandemic is I'm thinking it more about as an earthquake. And in the sense that, I mean, don't take me in a literal way, but again, it's just to convey the idea of the way I'm thinking about this, is that it's an earthquake. So you have an external cause, something really strong that is shaking the ground, but no one would argue like, oh, we should stop the earthquake. How the fuck do you do that? Okay. And the pandemic is something similar. So it's something natural. It's like, okay, it's human, humans are obviously like spreading it in a way, but what if it spreads to the air? What if it's, there's many channels it could spread? We don't know. I mean, we don't know much. Can we be humble and, not just assume that we understood completely the way this thing spreads? Again, I'm making stuff up, but again, I think it's pretty clear we didn't really understand what's going on here. What are the mechanisms? So that's another thing we should reflect. I always keep in mind. We cannot always find someone to blame, and sometimes things are simply out of control. So you cannot really do much. What you can do, you can get yourself prepared. So there's an earthquake. Okay, I'll make earthquake resilient buildings. I'll make shelters for the population to go when at the first site of the earthquake. Whatever, there's plenty of things you can do, but you don't really think about stopping the earthquake, because it's going on no matter what. And I think there's to some degree, like the pandemics is very similar to this thing, because we had pandemics in history thousands of times. People tried to stop them. You can read the accounts for, the Black Plague back in third century, and we didn't have the international flights, and still it spread very sort of quickly, and people were isolated in their villages and still were getting infected. So now, just don't take this thing too literally. Just to give you an idea that there are things that are out of control and we should accept it. All right. So, as they say, so let me just comment on this comment, as they keep discovering new things about the virus every week, so it will take time. I agree. I mean, it's we don't know much. I mean, can we as a scientist, like, be humble and say we don't really understand much? Let's try to do if we know that lockdown, we think that lockdown might work, but we know they have a huge cost, so let's try to do something else, or focus on some kind of other approaches. Let's try to, instead of wasting money on giving unemployment checks to people not doing anything at home, let's invest those money on hospitals. I mean, it's, again, I don't want to talk about trade-offs right now. It's just to give you an idea of what might be other lines of reasoning that you could make rational cases for, but let's not focus on the exact words I'm using at the moment. And again, I want to close with this extremely sad news, something no one has thought of before, but I have very bad news for you all. People die. I mean, people die sometimes. So we need to accept the fact that sometimes people die. All right? The problem is, what is acceptable level of people dying from COVID in this case? Is it 100 per day, 200? Is 10,000? 10,000, I would agree, is too much. Let's do as much as possible to that. But let's not pretend we need to go to zero COVID cases, or, zero COVID. First of all, I don't think it's achievable, at least in Europe, unless if you live on a very small island, or you live in a sparsely populated place with, you could maybe think about this. I mean, this is what they did allegedly in New Zealand. I'm not even disputing that. So, but there are places where you cannot really think about getting rid of it 100%. What about Africa? I mean, can you seriously think you can make this kind of track and tracing and very sophisticated ways of tracking people and putting restriction on very poor places? Forget about it. I mean, there's no way. So we have to live with this. We have to find a way of, we have to remind ourselves people die. So, like saying every life of COVID is life lost, and this kind of rhetoric. Well, there's people dying of car accidents, heart attack, cancer. You can name, there's thousands of causes. So, how preventable is that? It's another issue again. But it's something I've seen too many times on, there's a complete disparity, and actually there's research on this, that people are treating like deaths from COVID in a different way from deaths from other disease. Whether we should agree that it's everything, every life matters, so all these deaths matter the same way. Now we are only dealing with one subset of people dying. So, but let me move on, because I think it's I'm making too many points at the same time. So let me make a small recap on what I used to think before. And because I was absolutely pro lockdowns, I really thought that the theory behind the lockdowns and the ideas between the idea of the lockdown, so you have an exponential growth, you don't want it to grow indefinitely, and then once the only way of cutting down on this exponential spread is is making a lockdown. So it makes sense. People, you have the virus, you infect other people, and this grows. You have this R of T, the reproduction factor that if it's a constant, then every step in time it's increasingly, eventually it become an exponential, and then it's terrible, and then you saturate the ICUs and so on and so forth. So the way to do this is preventing people from meeting, preventing contacts for people. It makes sense. I mean, it's I don't have anything to argue with the logic behind it. I have problems when you see that it's not really working in practice. Okay, so the fact is that even if a theory is very logic and makes a lot of sense, it's still need to explain the data. So let me just comment on something that I hear all the time. Right now, the problem haven't been the number of deaths, but the number of people filling hospitals for many weeks. No, I mean, yes, of course. I mean, you want ICUs to be filled, but I mean that's just a proxy for the number of deaths, because you know that if you fill up the ICUs or you don't have enough medical staff to deal with the cases, then more people will die. And so the later you deal with this, the more people will go to the hospital, the more people will get infected, and the more people will die, because no matter how many places will be occupied in the hospitals, you will have a fraction of the people that are infected that will die. So the more people you infect, the more people will die. That's pretty linear. You have a constant factor between them. Now you have to estimate the infection fatality ratio, for the infection fatality rate, but there's a constant between these two numbers. So it's not true. I mean, the problem is, of course, it's one of the problems is you say, okay, we don't want to overwhelm hospitals. Fine. But at the same time, if you say you reduce the cases, you're also saying that you're reducing the deaths from COVID. Unless you say that in principle, all the people that get infected with COVID can be saved, in the sense that you have a very 100% effective cure for that, which is not the case. So if you say that you want to cut down on cases and infections, you are implying that you are cutting down on deaths, on death rates. That's it. Okay, so you cannot really dispute this point. It's a different thing. It's two different things. But one, if you want to cut down on infections, not to saturate the ICUs, then you are also cutting down. As a byproduct, you should have a smaller number of that. And that's exactly what many people argue. That's exactly what has been proposed in the literature by some scientists. They say that the effects of the lockdown can be measured in life saved, and some of them estimated also in 3 million deaths, like say 3 million lives saved. All right. So let me look at another couple of questions. So what's going on with the vaccines in Italy? In Serbia, we're vaccinated like crazy. We're always behind. Okay, I think Serbia has a different. I don't know if I should open this. Anyway, Serbia is getting a lot of vaccines from, I guess, from Russia and from China as well. So Serbia is outside of the EU. I think they have stronger political ties with the US and China. Sorry, with China and Russia, rather than they have with the US. So it's easier for them to obtain vaccines from Russia and China. And this is what it happened. So I don't know how much. I seriously have no idea about the vaccines, the efficacy of the effectiveness of the vaccines in Russia and China. It's nemam pojma, ne znam. So I don't know. It's there's a lot of politics behind this. So there's a lot of international. I mean, I shouldn't even say that. Of course, there's a lot of politics. There's a lot of peer pressure. There's a lot of other things behind science going around. So, and I don't want to focus on that for the moment. But let me go on. So I was talking about my stand on the whole issue before a few months ago, actually before the second wave started. And so the idea was that, again, lockdowns make sense. You have to keep people separated. You need to reduce human interaction. And so you will curb the spread of the virus. And otherwise you would run into an endless sort of exponential growth of cases. Eventually, we'll saturate ICUs, we'll have more cases and more people dying just because there's this constant factor between infections and deaths. So it would be a tragedy. And it made sense to me. And I think it makes sense. You can make a case for this, except I don't think it fits with the data. And that's the issue. I mean, you have this theory that is completely reasonable, and it's upheld by a lot of scientists. But if you look at the data, and we will come to the data very soon, it's at odds with what you see, right? So when you do a cross-country analysis and you try to do some kind of more sophisticated data analysis, you cannot really make a case, in my opinion, for the fact that the more you lock down, so the more you keep people separated, the more you reduce the human interaction, the more you're also reducing the infections and deaths. I don't think you can make that case based on the data again. Now, but and so when I'm talking about based on the data, I'm already talking about some kind of more sophisticated analysis. But the first doubts that I had actually are related to was being commented first by one of the listeners, and so that it's really hard to explain how come that the second wave, in terms of deaths at least, and if you look at the curve, at the beginning really looked exactly like the first one. I mean, despite the fact that we have been banning all the concerts of festivals, restaurants have been running at reduced capacity. Uh, you had to keep social distancing. You had to wear masks. There were lots of measures. Now you can argue that these measures were imperfect. People were going out. You had, it was going on, sure, but still we had a lot of suppression of interaction with respect to anything that was happening everywhere until February. I mean, we had all large gatherings canceled, all festivals, all concerts, everything was being canceled. So all kind of huge meetings were being canceled. So you should expect, at least from this side, to have some effect. Same thing, we are going to school with masks and keeping people separated, all sorts of things. So you cannot really, I don't think you can really argue that it's because these restrictions have been implemented in an imperfect manner that this whole mess started all over again, just like the first time. There were so many things in place the second time that, even though imperfect, I mean, you cannot make concerts like of 10,000 people as you had pretty much everywhere every week. Every major city had at least one, two, three large concerts every week. So, and that was not happening anymore. So you had a lot of large gatherings were avoided. Even small concerts were being canceled. So you had a lot of things that, no matter how ineffectively, we're enforcing these measures, um, then still, you had this growth that started all over again, just like the first time. And this is very, very fishy to me. At least, you look at Northern Europe, even so, I mean, at whole Europe, actually, or Northern Hemisphere, more or less, you had this curve starting at the same time, same dynamics, no matter what was going in place before. And so the first question is, then why were we, all the summer we had ups and downs, but we never had this explosion? Why did this happen all of a sudden in all of the countries at the same time? Like whereas, and we know that most of the countries have been implementing a lot of restrictive measures. Again, maybe it was not perfect, but can we blame, we know that many things were not happening anymore. There was a lot of restriction going on. We know that. Can we just blame this on the imperfection of the measures? I don't know. I think this is very suspicious. So first thing we've been told is that this virus is not seasonal. So there's not a seasonal pattern, at least in the media. This is not in the science. So in the science, it's still being argued, and I can see I would say they can make a case for seasonality, at least in northern countries, northern European countries, but northern hemisphere in general, like above a certain non-equatorial countries. Let's put it that way. You see a consistent pattern of cases going up and down, more or less, in the same period. And you really need to have a conspiracy. People need to conspire. States need to conspire to trigger the start of a second wave within a window of 1-2 weeks. It was all over again, all over Europe. And for 4 months it was kept in place, like it was kept in check. You didn't really have explosions of pandemic in the summer. Nowhere in Europe. You had some cases, some spikes. Was under control. By and large, it was under control. So what changed? I don't know. I would say this is something that is contradicting the theory, like what we've been told in general, that this virus is not seasonal, and so we should care about it no matter when, no matter where. I'm not sure it fits the theory. So this is a first piece of evidence I can think you can use against this line of reasoning. The other thing is that there's a lot of anecdotal evidence. When you talk about about lockdowns, then you only read in the press or you talk to people. the kind of evidence they had in favor of lockdowns is like, oh, but because they closed bars and then the cases went down, or they closed this thing and then cases went down. And that's always, it's maybe 1 week later, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. Like there's no clear relation between the date of lockdown and the peak of the curve. Sometimes it's right after the peak, sometimes before the peak. In general, it's not really clear. And many of this much of the evidence is being proposed in the public as to why this why do lockdowns work is based on this anecdotal fact. So you always hear, oh, but I was doing this. I live. This is the typical answer. I lived in this country, and I remember that after they closed these things, then after a while, cases went down. And this is a fallacy. Like it's a logical fallacy of correlation and causation. So how can you know that the cases did not went down anyways? So this is the first. These are some first doubts that came to my mind. So. Can we really say something about the places that did not implement these very strict measures? So, yes, you look at the data. There are many places in in Europe, outside of Europe, that did not implement a complete lockdown. Okay, the most famous of them is Sweden, but it's not just Sweden. It's Japan, for example. So. What's the thing here? Now, you read very often in the press about Sweden. For example, you see this kind of articles. Let me share the screen with you so I can, you know what I'm talking about. So there's, for example, okay, I've just taken one. This is the conversation. I don't know if this is a academic rigor or journalistic flair. I don't know. Maybe it I don't know how reliable this is, but this is the kind of titles that they are presenting. So Sweden and Japan are paying the price for COVID exceptionalism. And so let's just focus on Japan for a while. So this article is dealing with Japan like, they're big nationalists. They think their ways are better than the others, but they're paying for this very hard. And so you see this plot here. Okay, so you see daily new confirmed COVID cases until December. And you see a curve here. There's a first spike. That's the first wave. Second wave in August. Third wave starting, somewhere in October, going up, still not going down. All right? And so they're telling you, exceptionalism and hubris are closely related, blah, blah, blah. And so the fact that basically the bottom line of this article is that these places are opened and they're paying the price, are paying a really, really hard price for this. There's another article. This is, again, just to show you what's the bias in the media, because every time you see cases going down, you see, these guys close the bars and cases are going down. Great. You see, this is the kind of policies. Cases go up and, they are to blame. But, okay, these are Associated Press news. And, Japan's confirmed COVID cases hit new record. So, they are saying Japan is a new record and they're growing and growing and growing. It's a disaster. Can we have a look at the curve of Japan? Okay, so I'm comparing here. This is a plot that I made. It's the number of cases. So just, this is the curve that are showing you in this journal, in this newspaper, in this media outlet. I don't know what the conversation is exactly. So you see these three curves, right? These three peaks. Let's go to the data. Okay, this is Japan, Belgium, and Austria. So by the way, Belgium and Austria are two places that did a very hard lockdown on the second wave. The blue line here, this one, is Japan. Okay, so you see how much, isn't this like presenting this plot here? Isn't this misleading, to say the least? Like you're saying, they are paying the price for the exceptionalism. Like if I had to put things in context, then I would say, look, these guys, Belgium and Austria, did a lockdown and they're paying the price for the lockdown. If I had to follow the logic, I'm not making that case, like just to be clear. But isn't this crazy? So by the way, now, for example, you look at Belgium. Belgium actually imposed a hard lockdown on the 31st of October. And it's 2 days. It's exactly 2 days after the peak. So this is the peak, 29th. 2 days after, you get the lockdown. So can you really say that the lockdown is causing this drop? It was dropping when they imposed. Maybe, this drop is already caused by other measure. Maybe the other measure were enough. I don't know. It's again, this is for just a first point. Don't I don't want to draw too many conclusion at this point. I just want to like put some doubts on what's the usual narrative about these facts, which I find it really disturbing, to be honest, because again, they are claiming in this. This is just an example, but there's many examples of articles that have these headlines about Japan, about Sweden, how many people are dying there, how tragic is the situation there because they didn't do a lockdown. And then if you put things into perspective, in Japan at least, we'll come to Sweden later, but let's look about Japan here. You see how misleading is this? I mean, no, it's not acceptable. Okay, this is not acceptable. It's something. There's a narrative being pushed, and I don't agree with this. And again, Japan, by the way, it's a place they did a lockdown on a first wave. Second wave completely opened. They're giving vouchers to people to go on vacation. And you see, I mean, this is the number of cases. So what's the takeaway point here for me? Maybe there are other things at play. I mean, maybe there are some genetic factors that affect the spread of the disease. There are some kind of natural immunity. I mean, I'm making stuff up. I don't know. But can I just say that we shouldn't focus on lockdown and say, oh, look, we did a lockdown here and then the curve went down, because it doesn't make much sense. So again, this is all public data. It's this is 2 cases. By the way, so this plot is cases per million. So it's number of cases, but it's normalized by cases per million. This is also something you need to be careful, because sometimes they present data with with curves that are not normalized. So it's the total number of cases, but what matters is number of cases per million or per 100,000. It depends on normalization. Now I did these plots with cases per million, so never mind. That's not the important bit here. So let me check. Sorry. Let me check back on what was my schedule to talk. Again, there's lots of issues, lots of unknowns here. So we don't know, for example, in all this whole narrative, we've been told that there's asymptomatic spread. Then they found out there isn't. There's some paper was published in Nature that found out, like on 1,000 cases that were exposed to asymptomatic COVID patients, so to say. And no one of these 1,000 and more people that has been exposed to these asymptomatic spreaders got the COVID. So, but at the beginning we said, oh, we put a lot of emphasis on asymptomatics. So there is a lot of contradiction in the narrative that's been pushed, and I understand it because scientifically it's unclear. But then, if every other day we present some evidence in one direction and then contradicting evidence every other day. So you have one direction one time, it's say asymptomatics matter, then they don't matter. Masks. If you remember at the beginning, at least there was a huge debate on the mask. And at some point they decided that masks work and we have to wear them. Fine. But there was a debate at the beginning. So it's not so clear. I mean, I would say still nowadays, it's not so clear what's their effect. And if you wear them properly, because this thing has been really tested just in laboratories, we really have very few examples of experiments in real life, so to say. Because at the end of the day, you can make a lot of theories and experiments in laboratory, but then what happens very often is that in real life, these things do not mirror what you have in your lab or in your theory. There's a lot of friction. There's a lot of stuff going on. So, and sometimes it's, you can understand things, the way things happen by the theory, but you cannot really apply like on a literal basis. Anyway, so the other thing is that if you try to keep track of the predictions, and on both optimistic and pessimistic predictions, so both sides of the argument, like, got it wrong basically every time. So there's just so many. Everyone knows about this. So you read someone that says, "Oh, next week, 2 weeks, then everything will be blown up," and then nothing happens. There was a headline from a Belgian newspaper that said, right 2 days after the peak, they said, "Oh, in 10 days, the ICUs will be, intensive care units will be full, so we'll have to send patients to Germany." And this thing didn't happen, but still, and it was based on mathematical models, and no one questioned that. I mean, this is still going on nowadays. So there's again there's a lot of unknowns to say the least, and the thing that you cannot really rely on predictions. So we are walking like on uncharted territory by and large. We know a few things, but not so much, not as much, because that's the issue I have, that when people talk about science, so when scientists go on television, they usually on TV, but like on media or whatever, they go and they present a view like, oh, I'm a scientist, I have a scientific view, that's it. Whereas like science is more about understanding what are the error bars, what is the uncertainty about your statement. And in this phase, I think we are dealing with something that's completely new, and there's a lot of uncertainty, but we still hear people talking about this, and we have this kind of experts go on television in Italy every other day, and they always claim, in 2 weeks it's going to be the end unless you lock down. It's like, wait, we didn't really establish the effectiveness lockdowns, and you're claiming this like it's like the gospel. And I'm not even talking about the side effects and about the price that you have to pay. So in this phase, especially, you need to keep in mind that science is something that has to do with the error bars, with the uncertainties. There are things that they are uncertain, but to a very, very small degree. So we know that this works 99 0.999% of times. There are different, of course, you need to establish how confident you are. There are cases in which you are so confident that you can really safely say, this is true, and I believe this, okay? I don't think this is the case right now. I think the case that we are facing with the pandemic is more about different levels of confidence that you cannot really estimate. Okay, so there's a lot of uncertainty. And this is not what is being sold to the public. We always say, oh, but we have the scientists here with this committee, and they will solve things for us, and we just need to do what the experts say. Forgetting that actually there's a lot of experts that do not agree with these points of view. So that the debate is open. So there's not evidence, not enough evidence for this case. But this is not being discussed in the public. This is something that's really bothering me. I think it's upsetting. The way of science, like being the scientist said that, and we have to do this. I would agree in many cases when it's an issue that has been studied for 100 years. We have lots of data, but this is not the case. So it's largely unsettled. It's largely unknown, and there's a lot of evidence that goes in the other direction with respect to the dominating narrative. So again, let me just again stress this point. Most of the predictions were wrong. Still, like no one is really putting into question the way these predictions are being sold to the public, at least, and the way that some scientists are selling them. In some cases, just the media is making a false representation of what someone says in a paper, some results. Some cases, there are the scientists outright going and they go and make certain statements in a case where you cannot really make certain statements. So again, at this point, what's my conclusion is, bottom line is we didn't really understand much. There might be genetic factor at play. Maybe there is seasonality. There are a lot of pre-existing factors at play. How do we find out? Is there a way of saying that for example, number of infection, number of deaths is related to some of these factors? So what are the factors that determine the most? They are mostly related to what we see today. So in another way, what I was saying before, we know that this is a function of many variables, and we want to establish, so say we have the mortality depends on 40 variables, and we want to establish out of these 40 variables, which one played the largest role, okay? So how do you do this? You cannot, you have a problem here in the sense that what you would normally do in controlled experiments, you have a counterfactual. So you have like a control sample, which means you have two samples of people that have exactly the same characteristics. You give like a placebo, or some sample you don't do anything. The other one, you apply your prescriptions. So in this case, K means we should have, in this case, it means that we should have, for example, two Italies, one Italy without any restriction, the other Italy with restrictions. And it turns out you cannot really do this. The best thing you can come up with is, okay, let's take a country and a neighboring country, and let's look at the curves. It's a fair approach, makes sense. And so, but still it's not perfect. The other thing that you can do is, for example, trying to make a mathematical model of the issue at stake, and then you compare reality with the mathematical model. So you have a mathematical model that is describing, for example, the course of the pandemic. And you use this mathematical model as a like fake Italy. So you want to compare what happened in Italy after you impose the lockdown and the restrictions to the mathematical Italy, so the mathematical simulation of Italy without the restriction. And then you look at the difference. So this is, I mean, it's a plausible approach. It's something that people do all the time. But there are problems. I mean, how do you do, how can you rely on a specific mathematical model? So there are tons of parameters here. You cannot really simulate a country one-to-one. You need to make approximation. You need to make assumptions about the way people interact. You can, there's, you need to make assumptions. You cannot really simulate something and get the real, 60 million people, simulate each and every one of them in the way they actually behave. Of course, you cannot really do that. You can make some approximations. Now, the thing is that in these approximations, you don't have one approach. So when people say, oh, it's a scientific approach, it's a scientific model. Well, it's scientific because it's mathematical. Well, not really. I mean, what are the assumptions that lie at the basis? So when I do an approximation, why am I doing this? So what's the approximation? What are the assumptions? So this is something that you need to keep in mind, because when people claim in the literature that restrictions saved lives, they're not really doing not even a cross-country comparison. Most of the times they're looking at models. So they say, I have a model that predicts that the epidemic will go this way, the epidemic went the other way, and then that's just how things go. And so I can compute the difference and say, oh, look, I saved this many lives. In principle, it makes sense, but it's problematic. And I will talk about this more. Let me just have a answer to one question. So why are so many governments and scientific technical committees going on with these strong policies, even if there are adverse evidence about real proportions of the benefits from them? Okay, it's a different question. So first of all, there's again, there's a lot of scientists that believe, in this, that the evidence against them is not enough, and they still, support their models and their approach. And governments, they have political pressure. So the government at this point has two options. Because of what I was saying before, no matter what happens in a country, you will say it's because of the government. So if at some point the pandemic stops, then, oh, thanks government for the lockdown. And so if unemployment goes up, you would say, oh, fuck you, government, for example. So the point is that the politicians at this point, they have two options. It's either the curve goes up and people die, you have more deaths, and you withdraw all the restrictions, and then people will say, oh, you caused all these dead people because you withdrew the restriction. Either they put the restriction on. If the restriction don't work, they say, oh, it's because people were not complying, were not compliant. I am, I'm okay with what I'm with what I'm doing. I'm doing my best. I'm closing down everything. And so the real issue is that people can blame you either for dead people or for unemployed people. And being blamed for unemployed people is it's much it's much better than being blamed for dead people. I think this is the first thing. There's many factors at play here. The other thing is, of course, governments choose their advisors. So they don't choose their advisors at random. Of course, they choose advisors that at some point align with their political views. And so it turned out that most of the governments on this planet have taken this stance with lockdowns, with restrictions. And of course, the few that don't, they have a different kind of technical committee. And the few that don't, they are few. I agree, but it doesn't mean that in countries that they are doing hard lockdowns, there are scientists that are opposed to them on scientific basis. So again, I would say that mostly it's because of political reasons, and politicians can choose your advisor in a way that aligns with your views. And I think that's what's going on here. I think it's pretty much clear. So I wanted to move forward and talk about make some. Now, I've been talking a lot, but I didn't really show so much data, right? So I want to take a look shortly again at how this kind of views, so anti-lockdown views are presented in the press and on the internet, because I don't think I know, I'm a scientist myself, so like saying I'm anti-science, I don't know. You could say that I'm being paid by big pharma, I don't know, big whatever. I wouldn't say big pharma at this point because they have other interests, but this is what people claim. So let me just make my point clear. If you see here, so this is an article. It's on the Guardian. And so the pursuit of herd immunity is folly was found in this bad science. So this is talking about the Great Parity Declaration. So I don't want to enter into the details of that. If you don't know what it is, it's a declaration of scientists, Nobel Prizes, and professors in Oxford, Stanford, lots of different places that are opposed to lockdowns, and they propose a different approach. I don't want to talk about that right now. I'm just saying that that's an example of scientists that are against this approach, and there's a lot, and they are in respected institutions. They are top scientists, so you should at least take them seriously. At least look at what they say. But anyway, so the thing is that all of a sudden, when you see this kind of non-agreement, non-alignment, and this is presented as a folly, and it's being funded by anyone, so there's always like some interest behind it. They're not doing that because of science. They're doing that because they have money. And beware of something. I mean, I'm not saying that the scientists that are supporting lockdowns are, they have some kind of bad attitude. They're being paid by big pharma, or I mean, you shouldn't. I don't think you should ever question the intentions. I think we all have good intentions. Sometimes the problem is that we have prejudice on the way the world works, and so we fail to acknowledge when our prejudice, when our theories do not really fit the data. And this is something you see all the time with a religious discourse, with a political. You cannot really make a rational case for many things, because people, most of the times, you always try to shift your position and add some other factors until you're comfortable, even though the evidence is against you. Then you always try to make up things. So, and this is something natural. Scientists do this, and some scientists might have a good point. I'm not an expert in this. Again, I'm just saying this from a general point of view. So maybe I'm wrong. I admit it. Maybe I'm wrong. I would just want to discuss the things that make me think at least I'm not completely wrong, and the data that is being generally misrepresented, as we've seen before, or has been like overlooked. We don't hear much about these places. Like we don't hear about Japan, the way they are completely open, and still epidemics is basically nothing compared to other places. And again, the implications of what does this mean? Maybe it still means we need to lock down because we are not Japan. Fair enough, but let's discuss what happened there. Let's just not focus on people that on places that closed more, and we say we need to do like these places. Maybe there's an alternative. Let's see what happened there, and let's see what can we do. So, it's a good questioning other people's intentions. Like this kind of presentation is very it's not honest, right? So you should first talk about what someone's, especially if someone is a respected scientist, is another respected scientist, is a Nobel Prize. You should at least discuss his scientific point about that. It might be wrong, but still it at least deserves to be addressed. But here, like, this is what they're doing. They are funding this bad science. More on the point, though, there is this interesting website. It's called Antivirus, the COVID-19 frequently asked questions. So we call the people, they are COVID skeptics, and I'm one of these COVID skeptics, apparently. So they make a fair statement here about who doesn't believe. So they want to discuss the evidence in favor of lockdowns and the usual policies that have been pushed, and those that are being criticized by people like me, that I'm a lockdown skeptic. So they have several sections on the website. This is effects of COVID-19. These are all mostly questions that have to do with biology, so I'm not even touching them because I'm not an expert. Lockdown skepticism. This is what my today's podcast is all about. So I'm gonna address this one. And just to, again, if I had time, I would go through each and every point, but just to show you what is going on here, how people are saying no, lockdown work. What the fuck are you saying? Okay, so this is more or less what's the point here. So there's all these points. I'm not even addressing that, but okay, so let's go to this point, which is one of those. Lockdowns do save lives. So the importance of lockdowns in reducing the deaths from coronavirus cannot be overstated. One paper from June reviewed 11 European countries. So they're talking about one paper, which is pretty famous. It's called, let's open this. It's this, estimating the effects of non-pharmaceutical intervention on COVID-19 in Europe. So they claim this, among others. Now, I don't have time to go through all of them, but let me just, discuss this one. Fair enough, they acknowledge here that this paper has been criticized, but they mention one criticism. This paper has actually had like hundreds of criticism by other scientists. So what's going on here? So this paper is called Estimating the Effects of Non-Pharmaceutical Interventions, MPIs, on COVID-19 in Europe. And bottom line, what they do here, as I said before, they try to estimate how many people died during the so how many people would have died during the pandemics had no intervention taken place versus how many people actually died. So you do the difference, you make a mathematical model, you say this model is predicting the number of people that would die in absence of any kind of intervention, and you compare it with the actual data, the actual number of people that died. And then you see, okay, look, we found that so many people would have died, but we did these interventions, and so we saved that many lives. So this is the data from this paper. It's this table. And you see here, this is what they're doing. These are the estimates. These are the observed deaths up to the 4th of May. They have these points here. They say in Austria, they died 600, Belgium, almost 8,000, and so on and so forth. Okay, so you have all these numbers here. These are the actual dead people. These are the estimates. I mean, they have a model, then I would say, like with a model that includes all the restrictions. And their model says, oh, look, we did the restriction and we predicted this kind of number of dead people using our mathematical model. And this is like to say, okay, our model can reproduces well this data. It's just sort of, they want to self-confirm what they are stating. So we have a good model. And our model, once we introduce the restrictions into it, then it can reproduce the actual number of dead people that we have seen. So this is observed data. These are it's model data. Okay. So this is the interesting part, because this is the same mathematical model used assuming no interventions have occurred. Okay. So these are the numbers. They say United Kingdom 500,000, Sweden 28,000, and this is like the median value. This is like the most likely estimate up to the 4th of May. Okay. So first thing that I notice here, which is pretty fishy, suspicious, you have countries that had all sorts of different restrictions. Most notably, Sweden didn't almost have a lockdown. I mean, they didn't have a lockdown. They shut down large events and they took some other precautions, but not nearly as much as we did in Italy. And still are claiming that the same mathematical model can reproduce both this, it predicts both this and this at the same time. So it's basically telling you that you can, with a very just banning the large events, you can reproduce Sweden, but then to reproduce Italy, you need to add other factors. So you have different. I mean, there's something weird going on here, because I would say like no interventions have occurred. It's the most likely picture for Sweden, right? Sweden almost had no intervention compared to the other places. And so these are the deaths. This is the death count. They say, okay, we have our model, like had no intervention taken place. In Austria, we would have had something like 65,000 deaths, and so on and so forth. And so this is like the estimate. They say, okay, maybe it's between 2.8 to 3.5 million deaths. We averted. Bottom line is say, oh, this is the actual number is 128,000. This is the theoretical number. And so we saved 3 million lives. Now, what's the issue here? It's this model that they're using, which is freaking. I'm freaking out every time I see this. Let me go back to the paper. So what they're claiming here. Okay, let me just set this. Go to this point. Okay, they have a reproduction number in their model. They assume this reproduction number is constant, no matter what. Okay, so this is the reproduction number here, and these are the date. This is the time axis. Okay, their model says I have a reproduction number. So the reproduction number is that number that tells you how many people, if I have so many people infected in one day, and the reproduction number is larger than 1, then I multiply this number of people by RT larger than 1. It means that on the day after, I will have a larger number of infected people. So to control a pandemic, you need to drive this reproduction number below 1. Okay? So the point is that when you have a pandemic going on, this reproduction number can be 1, 2, 3. It can be, you can sort of try to estimate it, measure it from the data. And in Italy, it looks it was something like 4 or 5, and eventually went down to 0.8 something. I don't know, 0.5. I don't remember the actual numbers, but that's the dynamics that's going on here. But what are they saying here? So how does this model work? I mean, this paper, again, let me remind you, was published on Nature. It's like the most prestigious journal, scientific journal. They said, okay, we assume that the reproduction number is constant, okay? And every time the government does an intervention, we take it down. So in the case of Sweden, what they did, this is not the case. I don't remember which country is this, but let me load this. So what they're doing, maybe you see better now, they say, okay, this is reproduction number. We did this intervention, so we brought it down. We did this other intervention, so we brought it down this a little bit further. We did lockdown at some point here, complete lockdown, and then it went down. So this is an assumption. They are saying that anytime the government does something, this reproduction number, which again, it's a number that you can estimate from the data in a very noisy way, but it's sort of, I wouldn't call it like experimental number, but you can estimate it, right? And so it's a number that you can estimate. They say that this number, theoretically, is just going down at every date. So there's no like intrinsic dynamic in it. It's a constant, and then the government does something, and this is going down. Okay? And so they find that complete lockdown brings it down to this point, below 1. And so when you have the reproduction number below 1, the pandemic is starting to, how do you say, like, to decrease. So you decrease the number of cases, and so the pandemic starts to disappear. That's the bottom line. That's why you want to bring this number below 1. But they're doing this by construction. They are saying, look, we do this, and then because of this, we say that the number goes below 1. They're not actually looking at the data. What's the interesting part here? This is an actual estimate of this R of t value from the data. Okay, it's completely different. So what are they saying here is that you see the dynamics. So this is one estimate. You can do it in many ways. It's just to show you that a different approach here is telling you, look, this is going down already before the first lockdown. It was going down already. I mean, if you want to be like, I don't know, picky, you can say, oh, look, the first lockdown, and then right after it's going up. It's going up because it's a very noisy estimate. It's like a very hard measure to do. It's very noisy. But this is something that you get from the data. So, right, and this is going down naturally. And so they are taking this model where they assume that every interaction triggers a smaller R of t. And they say, look, we find this many deaths, but this is something they're sort of imposing. They're saying, oh, this is a constant R of t. Whereas in reality, R of t is dynamic. You already know that this is changing. And they're assuming constant until the first lockdown. It's crazy. I think it's crazy. I think it's a very, you cannot really make this point. It's the point that they're making here, I don't know. It blows my mind. I cannot believe this thing got published on Nature. To be honest, it's very sad, because then it's this kind of papers that are affecting the way that we live nowadays, right? So this is one critique that it became, that you see on this kind of. Let me go back to this site, and they cite this paper. So there has been criticized, as we report below. There are many other blah blah blah. They don't really criticize, though. They don't mention here all these papers that criticize it. There's many more. So let me go through this. There's another one. Again, this is a scientific paper. It's a different approach. So this is on a preprint. It's not been peer reviewed, but once I know that this thing has been peer reviewed, it's past peer review, then I don't care about peer review anymore. Like at this stage, it really doesn't make much sense on this topic. But let me just draw their conclusion. Inferences on the effects of MPI, so non-pharmaceutical interventions, are non-robust and highly sensitive to model specification. Claimed benefits of lockdown appear grossly exaggerated. So this, again, have you ever heard someone, like some scientist on television, telling you that the claimed benefits of lockdowns appear grossly exaggerated? No. I haven't. If you know of someone, well, I'd be happy to know that. But the debate here seems to be really confined to this very few, not even very few, but to this kind of thesis, or to scientists that support this kind of outcomes. Whereas this is one example. You can make tens of this kind of scam. I just want to go through this one because it blows my mind so much. It's so crazy that So the thing is here, again, you cannot disprove that lockdowns do not work, but the kind of evidence that's being used in favor of lockdowns, such as this paper, have been disputed so many times. And you can just, now maybe I don't know, please tell me if I'm being too complicated or it's being too technical, but you can, it doesn't really, it lacks basic science. You're already putting your thesis embedded inside your mathematical model. So you want your mathematical model to reflect what is your prejudice. And of course, then you will find what you're looking for, because these mathematical models, they are functions that in principle can be anything. You can tune them in some ways and then just pretend that they look like reality. Who tells you that this model is correct? You need to fit to different data. So, and this brings me to the next point. That is, what happens then in absence of lockdowns? We have this, we've seen this evidence, sort of, that is claiming that in absence of lockdowns, you would have this kind of millions of dead people and exponential non-stop growth of the infection curve. So let's see what happens. We've seen Japan. Let's see what happens in other places that didn't implement a lockdown. So I was talking before about the fact that you should find some kind of similar places to make to sort of a controlled sample. And so it turns out that in the United States, that have been widely criticized for every sort of reason. So you always, when you read about the US, you read people telling that, oh, well, they have a private healthcare system, it didn't work, or they didn't want to shut down. There's all sorts of reason of explaining why the death toll in the US is high. First error that is behind all this whole reasoning is that the US actually implemented all sorts of different policies. So you have different states with different lockdown restriction measures, with different restriction measures. So what I'm comparing here is Florida and California. It's the number of deaths. So it's smoothed over 7 days. So it's 7 day moving average to smooth the curve a little bit. And this is comparing two states. So it's Florida is this blue line and California is the red line. What happens here is that Florida and California, two hot states, they're on two different coasts, so you cannot really compare it one-to-one. Agreed, fair point, great. You'll never find a one-to-one match. So granted, let's see what can we learn from here. Florida is like the third most populous state. It's 25, I don't know, it's 20 something million people. California is close to 40 million. So as in terms of population size, they're close to the sea. You know, they have some factors in common. I'm not saying it's a perfect match, but can we learn something from this? Maybe yes. So what happens? California since March is going, it's basically full lockdown mode, like up and down, and sometimes they allowed for outdoor dining, then they forbade it. And it also depends on the counties. There are many things that depends on the on what on what were I saying? So on the county, so every county has some kind of different policies here. So again, we are lumping all these counties together. Again, it's a complicated issue. What's the bottom line? Again, I'm taking official data here. I'm comparing them, and people in California, the death rate over the last, at least this is starting. Let me see what date is this? From December on, the average number of deaths is larger. Okay, what happened? Florida is basically completely opened since 25th of September. So they opened around when was it? I don't see the numbers. Somewhere around here. Anyway, somewhere around here, Florida opened. Okay, and this is how the curve went after opening the whole state. California, on the other hand, has been closing most of the things, so they have much more severe restriction there. I mean, what do we learn from this? My point on this is, okay, maybe opening a place does not automatically mean you are going to kill everyone and the curve is not automatically going up. This is not the case for Florida. Again, this is a fact. So let's just stop spreading the lie that, if you open everything, then cases will go up. And by the way, I mean, Florida has had, like, famously 1 month ago, they had this Steel Panther concert. They had 3 shows with thousands of people. So you could argue, well, it happened somewhere around here, and then the curve went up because of that. I don't know. Sure. So why is Florida going up? Is California going up? I don't know. I mean, it's you can say, well, there's lots of people that are not complying. But here, like, no one is. I mean, there's no. You can look at videos and pictures from Miami, and there's lots of people. There's lots of crowds. So, like, the amount of gathering of movement, there's a lot of people going to Florida for vacation. There's a lot of movement going in and out. And there's basically no lockdown. Restaurants are working. You have concerts. You have theaters are open. Cinemas are open. So, again, I'm not saying we understood everything. Now we should open everything, and because of this, but this is evidence that is extremely at odds with what we have been told so far. So can we at least consider this, try to understand the factors that make this thing work? Maybe it's just because of the temperature. Maybe, I don't know. So can we say that places that had this kind of environment, like kind of temperature, like California, they can open and really don't care because the contagions will go up and down regardless? This is my take on this. I mean, can we at least try to make this point? Because the argument is always that we should shut down no matter what. It's the best option. Whereas I think this case is pretty clear. So let me just comment on one thing. I have friends in both states. Floridians I talk with are way more worried than people in California. I think it's because of the way that this issue is being dealt with by the media. Like, they say that if you open, then things will go, people will die and will be a catastrophe, right? It will be terrible. And so that this is feeling that I had also during the first wave, that things are closing, I'm safer, fine. Things are opening, I don't feel so safe. But is it actually true? Like, do the number? So are these feelings grounded in numbers and data, or are they grounded in what we see in the media? That is, again, they are pushing most of the times on the news, they're pushing for most of the times for closures, and they're trying to make excuses for why the lockdowns do not work, why restrictions do not work. And whenever something happens, you bet that there are people that are claiming that this rises due to the fact that the Florida opened. But then why is also California rising? So my point is, I've seen so many times being Sweden criticized because cases are rising. Well, but cases were rising also in Germany. So can you really reduce the logic to that? Like, Sweden is open, cases are rising. Okay, opening a country is bad, when we see that cases very often rise also in places that are completely shut down. That's one of the main points. There's more evidence actually from the US. And this is North Dakota and South Dakota. So it's two different latitudes, in the sense I'm not taking two hot states. I think there are more North, Central America. So it's different climate, different kind of population. Of course, they are sort of sparsely populated. So anyway, North Dakota had some kind of restriction on occupancy for bars, restaurants. They had restriction on mobility. They had some, lots of they didn't have a proper lockdown, granted, but they had restrictions. South Dakota basically didn't restrict anything, right? Now you look at the data, you would argue that North Dakota should have, like a better outcome, right? Because they restricted occupancy of restaurants. They're restricting a lot of things. But, I would say that these two curves, this is the deaths. These are not contagions. It's a number of dead people per million smoothed on a 7-day moving average. If you look at the way these two curves match each other, can you really make a case for the fact that, shutting down things in North Dakota has helped? Again, this is one case. It's to generalize, then there's another step, and it's going to be boring. I'm sorry, it's going to be long, but you can generalize and then look at other kind of evidence. But this is just to present something it's really easy to understand. You just see two plots of a place that didn't close, a place that closed, right? You can still say, okay, but we still need a lockdown in Italy because these places are isolated. These places are, I don't know, they're sparsely populated. Again, we can make a case for that, but can we try to understand why is it that the curve is going down without doing anything? So can we stop at, if you say that every time you see the curve going down is because of the lockdown, then your theory is false. This is a counterexample. You can say, okay, sometimes the curve goes down thanks to the lockdowns. Sometimes it doesn't. Okay, let's try to understand why it doesn't. What are the other factors that are working here? What's at stake here? What's going on? And again, this is something that has been it's outside of the debate, and it's a pity. It's shit. Seriously, there's a very biased way in which we are being presented the data in which these political decisions are being made. So I wanted to discuss another graph just so you see something again. I turn to the plot side now, and this is the number of deaths in first wave, second wave, different European countries. I picked a bunch of countries sort of at random just because you can plot them all. But the point here is that you see that, in my opinion, you see there's a pattern. So there's something here, 4 months, basically nothing, everywhere it goes down. And then it starts pretty much at the same point, same time, different curves, pretty much everyone of these countries implemented some kind of lockdown except for Sweden. But can you really say the effect? It's really hard to say, right? I would say there must be some kind of seasonal pattern underlying here. There must be something related to the season. It cannot be like for 4 months you had this completely flat curve and then this explosion all of a sudden altogether. Yeah, you really need to make the assumption that people in all these different countries were stopped using masks, stopped doing social distancing, stopped doing these whole things that have been doing. They were going to restaurants and doing a lot of stuff during the summer, and they at some point they were relaxing even those measures in October, September, and all at the same time. it's very, I mean, I don't know. I don't think you can really make a rational case for that. It's really hard to say that all these things happen at the same time because and still, fit the lockdown theory, like the fact that all these things are caused by and suppressed by lockdown. Now, again, you see here that, for example, you can look at this is Belgium. They shut down somewhere around here. I mean, never mind the dates, but they shut down and then it went down. So this is the kind of logic that it's at play here, right? So the curve goes up and then goes down. This is for deaths. And so they say that, that the narrative is that this curve can only go down if you lock down. But what happened to Sweden then here? I mean, they didn't lock down. The curve was going up and down more slowly. Maybe you can say, okay, if you don't lock down, you will eventually, will have more deaths related to the fact that you have a larger tail. Okay. Still doesn't mean that it will never, it will get a huge peak in deaths and, because of because you didn't do a lockdown. So to say the least, we have to be more cautious about this kind of logic. Again, when we say that things go down just because at some point before that people did something, the government did something. This is that doesn't fit with the data. So it doesn't fit with the fact that Sweden is going down despite the fact that they didn't shut down everything. It means that things go down, shutting down everything? Yes, they can. Under which condition is another question. Then maybe in some conditions they cannot. Granted. Okay, let's find out what these conditions are. Do you see the debate being posed in these terms? No. So this is disturbing. Anyway, do I have more? Okay, so this is Sweden versus Japan. I don't think it's interesting. I already talked about that pretty much. I was talking about these papers. Okay, so there's another. This is another interesting point. Let me check. They were talking also. I forgot. I cannot find a reference, but at some point they said they use this kind of logic, which is very, very funny. Just to maybe I jumped too long. So I'm back here to the website where I was COVID frequently asked questions, and at some point they say that GDP decline and and lockdowns are not at stake. So what they're saying is that, well, you don't really decrease your GDP that much if you where is it? I need to find it. Sorry. If you even if you make lockdown in place. Okay. So this is the statement. This is very funny. Okay. Lockdowns might lower the economic cost of COVID. Okay. It's not clear that growth, but this is an interesting statement. What they say here at the end of this point 8, they say that in general, countries that have contained the coronavirus have seen smaller falls in their GDP. Okay, so they are saying that containing the coronavirus is equal to making a lockdown. This is their assumption, because they say here they are countering the lockdown cause more deaths than they prevent, cause more damage than they prevent. So their assumption here is that if you contain the coronavirus better, it means that you must have done some kind of lockdowns, because they are defending this assumption here, this statement about lockdowns. Okay. And countries that have contained the coronavirus have seen smaller falls in their GDP. Let's go to this link. It's this one. Economic decline in the second quarter of 2020 versus rate of confirmed deaths due to coronavirus. So we do not see among countries with available GDP data. This is our world in data. This is an analysis they are doing of this data. So the claim here is that, if you lock down, you don't necessarily damage the economy. How do we prove this? Well, that we see places that have they have protected the lives of their citizens better. They have a smaller GDP growth, and this assumption here you're assuming that having a lower death rate means to protecting your citizens better. So means doing something actively. And at the same time, this doing something actively is related to the lockdowns. Okay, so this is the kind of reasoning that is behind this sentence. They say that countries. So among countries with available GDP data, we do not see evidence of a trade-off between protecting people's health and protecting the economy. We do not see an evidence of trade between. So they say that if a country has lower debts, it's because this government has protected their lives better. Okay, and this comes from this website that is claiming that lockdowns do not do harm to the economy, not as much as we claim, like as skeptics claim. So what's this graph plotting here? It's saying that this is the GDP growth on the x-axis. Y-axis is confirmed death per millions. Okay, how many dead people per million had all these countries? And this is a very simple correlation plot. And what they're plotting here, you see this. Well, if you reduce your GDP the most, it does not necessarily mean that you might end up with a very high death rate. Okay, so in fact, it's the opposite. If you reduce the GDP less, you also have a smaller death rate. This is the kind of correlation that you see at large here. And they say that this is related to government protection of their lives, of the citizen. So what do we see here? This is Taiwan, South Korea. So South Korea and Taiwan made exactly no lockdown. They might have done some efficient tracing at first. Taiwan is basically doing no tests whatsoever, no lockdown, nothing. It's like there's no intervention. So saying they protected the people's health, there's nothing to do with lockdowns at this point. Japan, same thing. It's like, okay, minus 10% is still, it's not among the ones that have been growing. Sorry, I've been shrinking the most, their growth. So it's a completely flawed case. I mean, in this case, in this graph, they're using this graph with countries that had no lockdown to prove the point that the lockdowns do not imply a trade-off between GDP and million people. They say, actually, to be honest, they say protecting people's health. But this does not imply lockdown at this point, because all these places with no lockdown, they did fine. So it doesn't mean that protecting people's health, you should consider listed point that protecting people's health doesn't mean locking down the whole population, right? I think you cannot have both things at the same time. But the kind of reasoning that is behind this, so debunking site, which is crazy. Again, I'll stop talking about this website. I cannot do it I could do it for more time, but I'll stop here. It's based on this kind of flawed reasoning. It's crazy. It's completely crazy. It's mind-baffling. Anyway, this is the paper I was talking before. I don't think it's useful at this point. Let me just shut down a few windows here and let me focus on what's left to discuss. So I was talking about reproduction number before, if you remember. So this is the number that's being used by many countries to estimate how serious the pandemic is, how serious the pandemic is. And as I said, it's a very important measure you can make. Sort of, again, it's not a direct measure, but it's based on the number of infections. What's the problem here is that the numbers of infected that you measure on each day, it's not a perfect estimate. Of course, there will be people that are infected, and you count them as infected on day, I don't know, X, but they got infected 2, 3, 4 days before, and they didn't know. So, you have this kind of uncertainties there. Then you have, of course, also delays due to bureaucracy. When is the hospital reporting that to the ministry? So you have all sorts of uncertainties of this number that might happen, right? That you cannot really say that for sure. You have some idea, but how to estimate this from the numbers, but you still need to propagate for a lot of error. So usually you just don't make a line, you make several for estimating R of t from the data. So the reproduction number, and this reproduction number, again, if it's below 1, it means that on the next day, like on the next generation, there will be less infected than the day before, and so it means that the pandemic is sort of fading. So it's slowing down, and this is a good thing. So the whole point here is that we need to, not the whole point, but one of the main points that has been stressed is looking at this R of t. So how is it varying? can we make some kind of correlation between R of t and the lockdowns? And so this is what some papers have been doing. Let me just show. So this is another one this is in Science. It's another one which I find really crazy. So inferring the effectiveness of government interventions against COVID-19. Let me simplify. I shouldn't do that, but let me just simplify what's the bottom line here. The bottom line here is that they are looking at lockdowns. So at R, how is it going down? So it's going down, you see. So this is sort of an experimental estimate from the data. And they say at this point, they take data from a bunch of countries. And they say at this point, on average, this R of t went down by this amount because these countries did this. So you see here, you see all different kinds of intervention. That every point here is an intervention that has been made by a government or a number of governments. And these are the kinds of intervention that they're accounting for. And bottom line, I mean, the idea here is that they are plotting, or they are stacking all the different R of t's that they can extrapolate from the observational data, let's call them that way, for infections. And they are trying to correlate. Again, correlation does not imply causation, but this is what they claim, that every intervention has an effect, has an impact on reducing R of t. So this R of t is going down no matter what, right? And every time it goes down, it's because of some of these interventions, or maybe a combination of those. And this allows us to estimate how much these interventions had an impact on the R of t. Again, this is something crazy, I find, because again, you're assuming that the whole, like the R of t has no intrinsic dynamic related to other factors. You're just correlating this to one single variable, which is what is the government doing? So is the government shutting down schools? Is the government shutting down theaters? And then every time something like this happens, you say, oh, look, and this day, this government did this, and this is related to a decrease in the R of t. What's the problem here? Is that R of t indeed has some intrinsic dynamics. So the reproduction number, in many cases, is going down by itself. And you can show this. I mean, this is okay. So this is the reproduction number, and it's shown for 4 different countries. Let me just cite this paper here. Full lockdown policies in Western Europe. Again, this is a scientific paper. It's a preprint here, granted, but there's people, there's a scientist working on this. Can we have a look at this? Can we trust this? I don't know. It's not peer reviewed. This one was, and I think that there's a huge logic flow behind it. But anyway, so this is again to stress the fact that you cannot just take this kind of correlation. You cannot say the curve is going down. I did this at this point, and then the curve is going down because of this, because it's correlated. And then I'm saying, look, these interventions had this much of an effect. It's not scientific. It's all of this. Correlation implies causation policy. So let me go back to this plot. What is this plot showing here? Wait, it's this one. What happened? Fuck. Okay. All right. So what we have here is the reproduction number. You see this one for France, Italy, Spain, Great Britain. What is this showing? These are different ways of estimating with different. Let me skip this. But as I told you, there are uncertainties in the way you can compute this reproduction number, and so that you have to use different approaches, and every different approach will end up with a different estimation of this number. Let's take just the main point out of this paper. This is that the main point here is that you can look at these different countries, so France, Italy, Spain, Great Britain, and each one of those has a reproduction number which is going down already before the lockdown. So the yellow line here, you see the vertical line, is the lockdown date. So you are taking how many days before the lockdown and after the lockdown. And this is for, they are doing this for many countries. They're doing, let's focus on these 4. with different methods. So they have 4 different estimates of this reproduction number. And they're looking at the date. So you see here, this is the day that the lockdown was enacted. And so this was going down already before. Can you say it's going down quicker? Maybe, I don't know. So the bottom line is that I want I'm using this paper for is that first of all, you have a lot of uncertainty here. And second of all, you see that the dynamics is the same. So this is not really changing the dynamics of the R of t. I mean, it was going down before, it's going down later. Okay, maybe it's going down faster. I don't know. Can we say that? You can make a case for that. It's helping. You cannot really say for sure that every kind of decrease in the R of t, so in the reproduction number, is due to a restrictive measure. You have no measure at all here. Nothing. I mean, the government is not doing anything. Maybe people are starting, when you heard that there was this coronavirus, people were moving less, so there were changes in behavior. People were not going to restaurants. Maybe they were going less. There are things that might happen. But, there's a huge difference between saying some people don't go to the restaurant, some people move less, some people stay home, and mandating, enforcing a lockdown on a national scale. It was 2 completely different countries. I mean, we can surely say that some things in the behavior of people changed. In fact, they did change, but not nearly as much as imposing a lockdown. And the bottom line here is that the reproduction number in these estimates was going down before the lockdowns. So how can we say that it's the lockdown that is causing this reduction in the reproduction number? This is a similar paper. It's another thing. And if you look at Spain here, you have different estimates. Again, it's going down before closure, like lockdowns and any kind of intervention. Maybe this helped bring it faster. Maybe, I don't know. I mean, it might be. I'm not saying it doesn't, but can we just make clear that this kind of inference, that this kind of approach has been used so much, is wrong? So I think this has taken a very long time, and I wanted to present something more, but this is another paper. I mean, again, it's just to prove the point that the science question is not settled. There's a lot of debate, and we are still acting like lockdowns are the only thing. And there's a lot of evidence that goes in the other direction. And again, let me just comment on this one. It's a matter of vulnerability among nations facing limited margins of adaptation. So what is going on in this paper? They are saying they're doing an analysis. It's a multi-factor analysis. It's called principal component analysis and a correlation matrix with Pearson correlation test. So this is a very technical thing, but in bottom line, what's going on here? They are taking all the variables. As I said, this is a complex problem. You have several variables within that enter this problem. So you cannot just take government restriction. You need to take, I don't know, obesity rates. It affects the number of people that die. Median age, if you have more people, then you will end up with more dead people. There's all these sorts of factors that end up affecting the final number of people that died. So the mortality rates. Okay, so what they do here, they do a principal component analysis, which is a technique that allows you to rank order the variables in terms of their effectiveness. So again, the thing here, I'm having a problem that depends on 10 variables, say 20. I want to know which one affects most the outcome. So I have 10 variables, 10 numbers that enter in and one that goes out. And I want to know the number that goes out, in this case, the number of dead people, to which one of these inputs is mostly correlated. This does not even show that you can make a theory of this causes this. I'm just looking at correlation here, okay? But if you want to show that X causes Y, you need to have correlation. They need to be correlated. If I want to show that this is causing this, if I move this has to move in the same direction, or the opposite, depending on the theory. But this needs to be correlated, okay? What are the results of this kind of analysis? Again, so what they do here, they take indices from 5 domains, so demography, public health indices, economy, politics, environment. which means they have numbers that are proxies for how much did the government shut down, how much is the government investing in health, all these kind of things. They are proxies. They are not, which means it's not a perfect comparison. You cannot really measure the strictness of a lockdown on a perfect basis. Okay, you have numbers that sort of represent what is going on there. You can have numbers that are correlated to that, but again, all these inputs, all these, even the outputs, I mean, even the same number of dead people per day, it's a very imperfect number. All these numbers are imperfect, so we are trying to make sense, assuming that they are that you have errors, but they're not completely flawed. You have some margin of errors, and they want to make sense out of it. So this is both in the input and the output. So what are the results? So this, again, these are what these people are doing. They are trying to see whether, besides from the strictness of the lockdowns, of the policies that countries implemented, there are other variables that are mostly correlated with the number of deaths. Okay? And these are the results. So higher COVID death rates are observed in the 25, 65 degrees latitude and the minus 35, minus 125 longitude ranges. Okay, so first of all, they find these are correlated. Again, it doesn't mean it's caused. It's correlated with this longitude range. So if your country is within these longitudes, then you have more chances of having a higher death rate. So the national criteria most associated with death rates are life expectancy and its slowdown, public health context, economy, environment. Okay, temperature, ultraviolet index. Stringency of the measures settled to fight pandemia, including lockdown, did not appear to be linked with death rate. Okay, so they are looking at all these factors and they see what is going on here. I have some number that represents the stringency of the measures settled to fight pandemia. And there's many papers that use this stringency index to do analysis. You can do this with mobility. I'll spare you. I mean, if you want, and if I feel like I can do another episode on the subject using this other data. But this is this is one of the things. So stringency of the measures settled to fight pandemia. It's a number that is sort of representing how much. So let's say Sweden was 50, and then I don't know, on this scale, Italy was 70, something like that. So it's a number that, and this number is not correlated at all with death rates. Again, we can go deeper into this, but I don't think I'm doing this at this time. I think we need to wrap up slowly and just to make my final point, my final statements, so I can sort of close this very long episode. Thanks for being with me for these 2 hours. Let me close. So let me read some of the questions. So here, wait. Data is also bad. Do you think that poor countries have real numbers? Also, China was in a bubble. How is that possible? No, sure. I mean, I don't trust data from China. I don't think you can really rely on data for poor countries. Yeah, that's why I was focusing here most of the times on rich countries. Like I know that at least in Europe and in the US, there are some standards that are more or less similar. I know there is some dialogue. They are trying to make things. It's not perfect. I mean, of course, you will have like some countries counting more deaths than the others. There's a lot of things that might not converge. But for sure, I would say that the numbers that I record in Italy and Spain and France are more like reliable between each other, more comparable between each other than those with, I don't know, Egypt or Sudan, whatever, China. So if anything, so again, I didn't talk about mobility. There's another interesting topic there. There's so one of the typical counter argument that people make to this point is that, well, you see, stringency is not correlated with lockdowns, but if a certain government implemented some politics, then it doesn't mean that people were following that. And it's fine. I mean, I agree with that point. But you can look at mobility data. So you can take, and this is a kind of analysis that I did, and you can take data from Google. You can look at how people moved, how much they moved, more or less with respect to the previous years, and you see that there's a decrease. So you see that most countries, I mean, in many countries, had a very sharp decrease in mobility. And you can track it with Google. Now, you would say Google is not perfect, but Android is like 80, 90% share of the market in most of the places. And most of the places, most of the people, they do have Android phones, even if, like, even if even in poor places, they do have smartphones, even in, Central America, that is maybe say 70, 80% coverage. Not everywhere, but that's the numbers, for example, for Panama. And so it's a good proxy. It's a good measure to. It's a good number to estimate how much people really decreased. They really complied in the sense that they were moving less. So if they're moving less, they're going less out. You can say they comply more with the order of stay at home, right? And so you see that also that data, when you look at it closely from Google, you don't really find much correlation with the reduced death rates and contagion. So I don't have time to discuss it now, but keep it in mind, and maybe I can do it next time. So I think I can wrap up and talk about something that was an issue that was presented before. Why are politicians keeping to do this if it's counterproductive? Is there some conspiracy going on? I don't think there's a conspiracy. I think there's mostly it's people make bad choices. Like politicians have make bad choices all the time, and people believe them all the time. It's not something new in history. There were many bad choices made on a large scale for many years, so it's not surprising. And again, like the politicians' incentive are several. So first thing is that if people die, then they are being blamed for deaths. If jobs are being lost because they opened, and so you have this sort of trade-off. Of course, like you shut down people, you shut down businesses, people go bankrupt and they become jobless. So you can either be blamed for deaths or for the economy, and like being blamed for deaths is much worse than being blamed for the economy, right? And again, because for the for deaths, you can always say, even if they're increasing, you can always say, well, but people were not complying. I did my best with the rules. Then there's another thing that like we tend to overlook how politicians think, but politicians are by construction, I would say, a class of people that want they sort of want to teach people how to. If you're a politician, I'm not meaning this in a bad way, but you think that so you should change something, you can impose it to the others, and so there's some paternalism in the sense you want to make rules, right? I mean, you want to make laws, you want to change the behavior of people, you want to change the way society works in a way. That's why you become a politician in the first place. So you have some kind of and this both on the right and on the left wing, right? Because very often conservative politicians, they say, oh, I don't want these novelties to come, I don't want gay people to marry. And so it's always about imposing some view. And same thing you could say about the left. Sometimes it's very similar. So you always want to impose something. There's some paternalistic view, right, on both sides. And I would say it's because by construction, it's you go into politics because you want to tell people what to do and not to do. So you have a natural inclination in doing this. And this this pandemics is the perfect thing. Like if you want to tell people how to live and what to do, that's I'm not saying that they want they do this on purpose, but you are more inclined. There's people that are at the government, they went there because they are more inclined to. They have this need to tell people where they really have this this fear, that this need to tell people what they should think and what they should do. So again, of course, there's another thing. First time, like the first wave, pretty much everyone was in favor of lockdowns. Like everyone was looking at it as the only solution, right? And that was everyone. Not everyone, but by and large, there was a lot of agreement, and it was very shared. I mean, as I said, also I was in favor of it, so I'm not denying it. So what will happen in if you don't do the same thing on the second lockdown, or like on the second wave, and you seriously relax the measures, then you are contradicting yourself. And this is something that politicians never really admit they're at fault. But Angela Merkel did that and said, "Well, I didn't do enough." So, but she was not contradicting herself. She was blaming herself for not doing, like, for not being harder. So she was not like saying, again, she was not saying lockdowns are bad. Like, no, I didn't do enough of it. And I mean, despite that, then if you look at Germany, they've been into a very sort of very serious lockdown since 16th of December. The curve didn't go down right after. It stayed flat for contagions and it went up for deaths. So on a side note, so just to tell you, again, I digress, but the point is that politicians do not really like to contradict themselves. So even if now we have, I would say we have enough evidence that we can do pretty much well without lockdowns, we can use other approaches. And we should, anyways, we should discuss that in a more open way and just don't think that if we open up some activities, things will, inevitably be destroyed. There's counter examples of places that opened and they are not people are not dying by the thousands per second. So I would be confident that we should have this discussion. We are not having it. And the other thing is that again, there's this good scientists. They always are featured on television and they support this kind of policies, and we are overlooking all these others. I mean, I again, there's lots of paper, lots of things behind. I don't have time to go through all of it, but there's a lot of people that are not in agreement with this approach. So we should also like give voice to them, and it's not like 1%, 3%. There's lots of people in academia, and they just don't get featured that often on TV and on major news outlets. So I think that's another problem. We always see one side of the argument, and we cannot really say that the argument is closed after it's a new issue, it's a new pandemic, it's new everything, and we're just saying, oh, these guys are right. The science is settled. We know everything. Bye. No, the science is not settled. There's a lot of evidence. Again, we at least we need to discuss this data. Then you can prove me I'm wrong. Fine, I'm fine. Okay. If you can explain me why these places went down without lockdowns, without making like very complicated models of how things work, then I'm fine with that. Okay, then I'll accept that we cannot do like other places did. Great. But we this whole thing started as because China did that, and then we do this. So now we are claiming that we cannot compare ourselves to, I don't know, to Sweden. We cannot compare to Florida. We cannot compare to Japan. We cannot compare to North Dakota, to Taiwan, to whatever. But yes, we can compare to China. Okay. I don't see the logic behind this. China did this. We should do the same because it worked. Okay. Other places didn't do that, and it worked. Anyway. Last thing, and that I really care, and that's the most important reason why I was doing this whole thing. It's this whole discussion is that I think that we musicians, now I'm talking, these are my personal consideration, just to wrap up, that we have been really hit the hardest. So music and all people that work in the business of music, they have been really hit hard, big time. It was such a blow. Like festivals have been canceled already for this year as well. And does it really make sense? Can we have a discussion on reopening? Like can we like be part of the picture? Because anytime there's political decisions, like there's the impression that whatever artists do. So I'm not talking just about musicians, but there's a lot of other people that work in theaters, cinemas. They're not working. Many of them, they're not covered by any kind of aid. And I know because I know these people personally, and they don't get a single cent from the state. And we are pretending that they can just keep it that way. And we just don't, we close, like we discuss about closing stuff. Oh, we close a cinema, we close a restaurant, we close like this. Like nothing happens. No, this is a serious thing. Closing stuff is a serious thing. Preventing people from work is a serious thing. We all started this this whole thing with the pandemic started like it's gonna last 2 weeks, then 1 month, 2 months. Okay. Eventually we got into summer, and now we're back to square one here at the same point. And we're not discussing about the issues that people have, because many people accepted this situation thinking it's temporary. At this point, we cannot really assume that this situation is temporary. We really need to have a discussion about opening and getting, again, this is on a personal note, I'm not talking about science, but I think it's very important that we involve musicians. And the feeling I have is that many musicians didn't want to take any sides on this, didn't want to say, reopen because I'm starving, because they don't want to, feel like the bad guys in the story. And I think it's because we lack, um, many times there's not enough scientific background to make a rational case for reopening, for lifting restrictions, for leaving, for trying to at least to find a compromise. And it was something that was done in the summer. So it's something that really needs to be discussed now. For as much as I can do, I didn't do much. It's, it's just a live stream with a bunch of people, but I really hope that like other musicians sort of try to discuss these issues and try to ask for reopening, and like not just ignore them, because first of all, the scientific part of this whole lockdown thing is not settled at all. And there's, I showed some of the results. We can go for longer discussions if anyone wants. And and there's a human cost to that, and there's a human cost for people that work in the business. As we'll see, I mean, we will see what's going to happen, but we are facing, the perspective of being shut down for the next year as well. So it's not fun, it's not free, it's not like, oh well, we just do this and then things will, recover. It doesn't work that way. And so I really felt I needed to give my 2 cents of thought. So thanks a lot. And okay, let me just reply to this last comment. Yeah, you think we are in the first, so the comment says, you think we are in the first world and here people won't die of hunger? That's what many believe. Okay, again, people don't die of hunger here. Great. I mean, but can you get depression? Can you get, you can, like, sort of, you lose the meaning of your life, or people are preventing from things that you love to do for 1 year, 2 years? We don't know. And people, there are some people that are actually struggling. There are people that have been thrown out of their homes, and they don't, because they couldn't pay the rent for 6 months. And so now it's cold outside, and I mean, I don't know, there are homeless people. This thing has created homeless people. Being homeless in in the winter is no fun. People are gonna die for this. And I'm not even talking about all the other side effects. I'm just, talking about the side effects on my specific industry. Not, but there's a digression. So we can say, well, you don't die of hunger, but can you survive like in jail for 2 years? Is it worth it? I mean, I don't know. These are questions that you never, you never see asked, especially by musicians. Again, because I think musicians don't want to be like look like selfish and say, I want to reopen because I'm a musician, and so that's why I want. No, I mean, I'm like, me on a personal level, I'm doing fine. I have another job, so I got a salary. I'm completely fine. It's not that. It's you can make the primary reason here is scientific. So it's not clear the lockdowns work. It's not clear what their price is. It's not clear how effective they are. And I've discussed a few of this data. I grant you. I spent 2 hours and actually presented like half of the things I wanted to discuss. So just keep that in mind. But yeah, that's the point. So first of all, it's a scientific thing, and then there's a human side to that we shouldn't forget. Because of course, the human side, then you can say, I don't want people to die. Well, people mostly would die anyways. It's a sad fact of life. I mean, it's a new disease, and we don't have as much control on this as we pretend we are. Anyway, so thanks a lot for following me. They are suggesting it that next time I speak about cosmology, let's see what the next episode is going to be about. I would like to do this on a weekly basis. Let's see what comes out. And for the moment, thanks for being with me for the first live episode of the GattoCast. I hope I wasn't too boring, and see you next time for a new episode of the GattoCast. See you in the future. Who knows when?